Heading here is Elisha and the widow's oil. It'll be a little short this morning because Brian was scheduled to teach, but Brian hadn't been feeling well and he's on his way down here. He'll be here for church, so you got me. Keep in mind, Elisha has followed Elijah in ministry. And Elisha had a request. Come on in, John.
Good morning.
We're in 2 Kings chapter 4. Second Kings chapter 4, Elisha and the widow's oil. So keep in mind that Elisha has followed Elijah as the prophet. And do you remember what Elijah said to Elisha? I'll give you whatever you want, in so many words. And what did Elisha say that he wanted? Double portion of Elijah's spirit. And you follow it, and then what was the reply or the condition that Elijah made in order to have Elisha's request granted? You remember? What did he tell him? What did he tell him? In so many words, and I brought a message on this down through the years somewhere, simply entitled, Just Watch. Just watch. And the times in the scriptures that God the Holy Spirit or the prophets or somebody said, you just watch. And so Elijah, in so many words, says to Elisha, you just watch. You stick close to me. You stick close to me. You follow me. And if you see me, depart. If you can see me, depart. What you want will be granted. And Elisha, remember, saw Elijah leave this earth in a chariot of fire. And so Elisha, and you follow it through, and maybe we'll make note of this as we go through. You follow through the ministry of Elisha and Elijah, and you put them, maybe, I got a chart somewhere, in my stuff, and maybe I'll find it and make a copy of it. The miracles that God and the exploits that God allowed Elijah to do, and then what God allowed Elisha to do, and Elisha did twice as many. See? And so, and then some, I think. So, Elisha, now we finished up chapter 3, and getting into chapter 4, it said, a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. So the servant is, here's an interesting thing. You find this throughout Scripture. A lot of times it just says a certain man or a certain woman. And in this case, it says a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elijah, saying, your servant, my husband, is dead. The husband is not named. But he somehow was a servant of Elisha. Could have been in battle, could have been, he followed him. But he says, my husband is dead. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. You know that he was a godly man. And she says, and the creditor is coming to take my two sons to be his slaves. Now, so you can get just a perspective here. In the days of the prophets in this particular time, if you owed money to a creditor and you had children, especially sons, those children could be taken from you and put into slavery to whoever the creditor you owed money to. See, that's just the way it was done. So, so that's what this woman feared. She said, I'm now a widow. I have two sons, and I don't want to lose them. So she says, the creditor is coming to take my two sons to be his slaves. So Elisha said to her, here's an interesting thing. What shall I do for you? What do you want me to do? There's a lesson here for us. A lot of times, I couldn't count the times on probably everybody's hands and feet in here, that when I've been counseling somebody and they've laid out a scenario, and I'll listen. And then when they get all done, I'll say, so what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? See? Jesus, look at the life of Jesus. If Jesus said that once, he said a lot of times. What would you like me to do? What would you like me to do? See? And then, because sometimes when we're getting involved with people, we want to do things that don't need to be done. We want to do things that don't need to be done. See? And so sometimes we, as people are sharing, we're thinking about how we can handle the problem. When whoever has the problem may have a different idea. See? And so we say to them, what do you want me to do? And then we listen to them. And then we say, okay, I can do that. Or I can't do that. Or I can't do that, but maybe somebody else can. See? And so Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? So he wants to find out what resources, at this point, what resources this lady has that she might, and I'm thinking Elisha is thinking, okay, she's concerned about the money that she owes. Maybe she has something here that she can sell. How many of you have been up against the wall financially and then thought, I don't need this, I'll sell this? Okay. And that's okay. That's okay, because we always have stuff that's laying around that we don't need. Too much. See? And I'm amazed when we've had yard sales. When Nancy and I have yard sales, and we say, okay, it's amazing what I can put out there to sell that at the time I bought it was so important. And the standard reply I get, the standard thing that comes out that my wife and my kids will say and my grandkids will say, when I lay stuff out there, they'll say, Nancy will say, honey, it's still in the box. You've never unpacked it. Why? I said, hold on. I wanted it. I liked it.
I thought I'd be thinking.
Yeah.
You know what I saw at a giveaway yesterday?
Hey, just a FYI thing. When I was in the military, I was a typist. I could do 82 words a minute without any mistakes. And because I did it every day for 3 or 4 years. And so, Nancy can tell you, I'm horrible when it comes to computers. And there was some stuff I thought, I handwrite all my notes, and I thought, man, sure be nice if I could. And there was some document some little thing I wanted to put together and keep it. And I thought, well, I'll find me a nice, inexpensive electric typewriter, and I'll sit down at that thing and really fly. So I get me a electric typewriter at Miranda's thrift store at McKinleyville for about $3. And it was a good one. It worked and everything like that. It never got out of the case once I got it at the house. Because I didn't want to take the time to move around stuff on my desk to put that thing on there. And next thing you know, I'm putting it in the car and take it and gave it away to the thrift store where I bought it. And the fellow says, I think I've seen this before. I said, yeah, I bought it here. So Elisha is thinking, okay, this woman is going to have to, let's see what she has, perhaps, that she can sell to get money to pay her creditors. Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. She's thinking that it's not that significant that she has this jar of oil. She's probably thinking too that she needs to sell something. And she probably in the tone of voice of Elisha, she picks up on the fact that she's going to sell something. And so she's thinking, okay, what do I have to sell? What do I have to sell? What do I have to sell? And she says, your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. She didn't think it was that significant. And I'll see what happens. Then he said, go borrow vessels from everywhere from all your neighbors. And she goes, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. So she's thinking, put yourself in her position. What would you be thinking? What would you be thinking? Huh? What would you be thinking? It could have been in this woman's life, she'd never had a miracle in her life. See? Yeah. Do not gather just a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour it into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. But she says, it's nothing but a jar of oil. Nothing but a jar of oil. So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Oh. Let me remind you, this actually happened. Okay? And like I tell the guys at the mission, I said, if you hear it once from me, you'll hear it a lot. If you're around here any length of time, this is not Mother Goose or Dr. Seuss. Okay? This actually happened. Actually took place. And so she went from him, she shut the door behind her. Now, notice, there's no evidence here that she argued with Elisha. See? She may have thought it was goofy, but she was about to. And sometimes we think, oh, Lord, this is What do you mean? What's this guy saying? What's this guy saying? So she went from him, shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her. Uh, what do you think the sons are thinking? Mom's gone crazy. It's not likely that these sons knew Elisha that well. All they know probably that maybe mom said, he's a prophet. He's a prophet. And he's a godly man. And that's all they know. See? But she obeys. Sometimes when we think about how ridiculous something can be, we lose sight of the fact that God can do stuff. See, I remember a time back when I was in the military. It got close to payday, and I'd take the bus from the base, the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, out to the church I was going to. And the bus fare, believe it or not, back then, was 15 cents one way. So I'm in church on a Wednesday night. Next day's payday. John, you were in the military. You ever reach a point where for the day before payday you didn't have any money in your pocket?
$81 a month.
And see, so, yeah. So I'm sitting there in church, and this young gal, whom she was 18 years old, and God had called her unmistakably to the mission field. And she was in the process of preparing. And she was from a family of godly men and women. And so she came to the church and gave her testimony on how she was called to the mission field. And so then the pastor, after getting done, he says, okay, we're going to take up a love offering. And so the ushers come up and they get ready to take an offering. All I have in my pocket is 15 cents. God ministers to me and said, give the 15 cents, put it in the offering. And what went through my mind was, but God, all I got in my pocket is 15 cents. And that'll get me back to the ship. And again, there's that nudging of the Holy Spirit. Put the 15 cents in the offering plate. So I said, okay, Lord, I'll do that. So I dropped nickel, dime. I hung on to that nickel for just a moment. In fact, they'd probably already gone by and I reached and put it in. And I'm thinking in my heart, okay, Lord, I did what you... We go through a couple things when that happens. We say, okay, Lord, was that really you that was telling me to do that? And I had the witness of my spirit that it was God telling me to do that. So I just did it. So I'm milling around after church. I'm thinking, I got to wait until everybody's out of this building, and then I'll go out and stand at the road and hitchhike into town, or the ship. And up comes this gentleman by the name of Joe Tolston. He's one of the elders in the church. And he says, you know, Jane, his wife, he says, Jane is really missing Aaron and Ray. her two sons that were in the military, and they were overseas, both of them. Different branches of the service, but they were overseas. Says, and she mentioned to me 2 or 3 times during the last week that she'd just like to have some young boys around the house. So he says, and he pointed to a friend of mine. He says, I already talked to Art this afternoon, and Art's willing to come to the house. And he says, I want you to come to the house. And he says, you and Art can have the room upstairs that belongs to Ray and Aaron. And it's yours. And laid out some parameters as far as curfews or anything like that. I was excited, see. And that built a relationship and made Jane so happy. And of course, Joe was too. And so, a lot of things, what?
You forgot to mention the part that Joe worked on the way.
Oh, yeah. And, yeah.
I've heard this story a few times.
And then Joe, in the route he needed to take from his house to get to the base that he worked at, he had to go right by the front gate of the base where I was stationed. So every morning, go. And then, of course, depending on what time I got off in the day, if I could call Joe or leave word for him, and Joe, I'm not going to leave the ship, early today, so I'll be out there at the gate to wait for you. So God provided a need. Not only an immediate need, but a need for quite a while, all the time I was stationed in over at Virginia, the fellowship that we'd have. And Joe was a great teacher. And so Joe and Art and I would have Bible studies. He'd say, I don't know how you guys do your devotion, but he says, I'm up every morning at 5 o'clock. So he said I'm gonna holler up the stairs, and he says, you guys will have about 5 minutes to come downstairs, so we're gonna read the word and study. And he was our dad, away from home. When you come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour it into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. So she went from him, shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. Now it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. If there would have been another vessel, she'd add more oil. See? Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. Now, some of you know, spent a few days in the hospital. And I went down there and hadn't planned to stay. But the lady doctor, she says, so is there anything else? She went over my cardiology stuff, and she says, is there anything else that you need to tell me? Well, I've been slurring my speech a little bit. And so I mentioned that to her. And she says, how long has that been going on? I says, oh, probably for the last month or two. And boy, she straightened up. Nancy was in the room with me. She saw the body language with that lady. She straightened up and she says, I'm putting you in emergency right now. Turned our world upside down. When she says, okay, we're done, and she kind of shut off the computer or turned the screen around or something like that, and I'm thinking, okay, we're done here, and we're going to get in the car and come back home. But I go to emergency. And then Nancy goes back to Roner Park, gets a motel, and then heads on home the next day. And so they admit me. And then right away, as soon as they come in and examine me late at night, then they come in and tell me the next morning, I think you need a pacemaker. So we're going to check you out for that in case you need that. Come on in. Welcome. So they come in, they lay it all out for me. And keep in mind, how many of you ever been in a hospital bed? You don't get any sleep. Especially if you got something going on, and they come in, about the time I doze off or something like that, they'd come in, wake me up and said, you need to take this pill, or we want to draw some more blood, or whatever, I'm thinking, why can't those lab people, why can't they just go sleep at night? Leave me alone. And so I'm up early, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I can't go back to sleep. My Bible's right there. So I pick up my Bible and I read this. So the cardiology team comes in next morning about 8, 9 o'clock. And they're sitting there, and they're going over all this stuff with me, talking about a pacemaker. And I called him the pacemaker dude, special doctor that they have. And it's like he should have had a tag that said doctor of pacemakers. And so he says, leans over and he says, so what do you think about this pacemaker? And I'd already drawn an application from this that I read early that morning. And I said, well, I don't know whether you knew it or not, but I'm a pastor. And I said, and I still had it sitting on my tray, and it was open. And I said, and I was reading here. There was this Shunammite woman. And I said it just like, I said, there was this Shunammite woman, and she ran out of oil. And her husband had died, and she had 2 sons. And I'm really getting into the story. And I'm telling this group, there's about 6, 7, 8, 9 of them sitting there. And I said, and they got the look on their face as I'm sharing, as if to say, what does this have to do with the question we just asked you? See? And my family would probably be thinking the same thing. They ask me from time to time, where are you going with this? And so I said, that Shunammite woman, I said, God, and I'm telling these people, I said, God not only met her immediate need, but it met her need in the future. And probably the youngest of that group that was sitting there. I found out later he was an intern. He says, I get it. And I looked at him, I said, folks, I'm having a good time. I'm teaching a Sunday school lesson here. And I said, what do you get? And he looked at the pacemaker dude and he says, do you mind if I tell him? The doctor says, go ahead. He says, I'm thinking that you're thinking your pacemaker is not going to only help you right now, but it's going to help you for the future. I turned to the doctor and I said, you need to give that young man a high five. And I says, that's the way I'm looking at it. They decided not to do it quite yet, but probably will. But I drew that application. Here's another lesson to us. When we read the scriptures, this is a short story, right? Short story. But when you read the word, You say, okay, what does it say? What does it mean? And then you've missed it all if you don't say, okay, what I've just read, what does it mean to me? See? Reading this without any application, you may not have even well read it. See? Because Jesus said, remember Jesus said, and it's a key verse in the Gospel of John, right at the end of the Gospel of John says, many other things did Jesus do that are not written in this book. And he's talking about the Gospel of John. Not talking about the whole Bible, talking about the Gospel of John. He says, many other things are written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ and you may have life through his name. So there's always a purpose. There's always a purpose. And what we can take from this is that God, when it comes to God meeting needs, God not only meets our needs for the moment, but he'll meet our needs for the future. And can you imagine, next thing we know, we'll get into this perhaps next week, Elisha raises the Shunammite's son. And so Elisha just moves from one event to the other. But we cannot forget the people that were left in his wake, and how they were blessed. See? And people come into our lives. People come into our lives. See? And that same cardiology bunch that showed up that first morning was the same cardiology bunch plus one that were there to tell me that they were going to hold up on that pacemaker. See? And I said, thanks for all your help. And this same young man that had volunteered, who understood what I was getting at, the same young, and they said, well, thanks for you helping us. Thanks for stuff that you shared with us. It's really helped us. And this young man looked right at me and he says, more than you'll ever know. See? And then the nurse that I had, male nurse that I had, he's looking at my chart. I'm just sharing this stuff with you, tell you how God works. When the nurse, this male nurse, starts looking at my chart, he says, Colbert. Oh, you live up in the Redwoods?
Everybody does talk.
I said, yeah, matter of fact, I do. And I said, why do you ask? He says, you're a pastor up there, right? I said, yes, I have. He says, where did you pastor? I said, well, I was out at Shelter Cove. He says, there's somebody else out there that I met that's a pastor out in that area. And I mentioned this one fellow had been there, and he said, no, that's not him. And then I said, Bruce Willis? He goes, 100% Bruce Willis. See? And by this time, he's come over and he's sitting down beside me on my hospital bed. And I said, how do you know Bruce Willis? And he goes, I said, where'd you meet Bruce Willis? He says, right here. That's the hospital bed. He says, he was down here and I got to talking to him, and he says, and he goes, Bruce Willis likes you a lot. I haven't seen Bruce yet, but I gotta tell him that I met this guy, John, down, this nurse. And so, and then when he came, and then he was up here, the nurse was up here last summer, and then made a couple connections, I think, with Bruce and everything. He knew about the area. And then he when it came down to getting out of there, getting down out of the hospital, Nancy and my older son Doug, they're on their way to get me. And they said, we don't want to get down there, and all of a sudden they say you aren't going to get to come home. So I'm pressuring these people. And so John, this nurse, he's going to bat for me and everything like that. And he's been there 18 years, so he has a little bit of pull. And so he's running all over the place. People were calling me, he said, I gotta help this client right now, can't deal with you. And away he'd go. Not another patient, but maybe probably another nurse or something like that. And then he writes me a nice note. If I knew I was actually going to be here this morning, I'd have brought that note. But he said, God bless you. And he says, this, in so many words, this was awesome. In all these years that I've been here, this is the fastest checkout I've ever been involved in. See? And so,
That was because we had to get back here for our great-grandson's last
yeah.
basketball game. We did a drive.
And I said, so where do you, God looked with favor on me, people. See? And I said, I don't know, I'm not that excited. I said, I'm in a hurry when I leave here. And I said, I'm not that excited about getting out of this hospital bed and then going downstairs and walking all the way to that parking lot. And he says, tell them to move right up front. So they came right up front. And so he took me down. I said, he brings in this wheelchair type thing. I said, John, I can walk. He said, no, you can't. He just put it in there and says, you can't walk fast enough to get you out of here. So he puts me in there, and we go down the elevator and moved out, and he meets Nancy and Doug and everything like that. Said all that to say this. When God swings into action, you better be ready. See?
Did you invite the young man to come visit us?
Pardon?
Did you invite the young man to come visit us
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. I got his name and everything like that. And so got where he is on that floor and who to contact. I says, you really helped me. He says, I need you to make sure you tell my boss that. And so I said, will you give me your boss's contact number, one of the head nurses there or whatever. So the thing is, all of what took place with me aside, but when God ministers to you and you're in a situation and you need God's help and you're willing to accept his help, when he swings into action, you better be ready. You better be ready, see. And we've seen at this little church, just in the last few months, this little church go from, 8 or 9, 10 people? What did we have last Sunday? 40, 45 or something like that. And we had people missing. Because we've been praying, God, just grow us back up. See? And when God hears something like that, and we're serious, he swings into action. And he does it in our individual lives. That's all I got. Yeah.
And God swings into action, and even if you're not ready, he swings you into action.
Yep. Yep. And I was just amazed when John wrote that out, said this is a fast, I says, are you sure? He says, all these people, you could check with them. He says, they'll tell you that nobody gets released from this hospital this quick. But I was serious. I needed to get out of there because I had stuff to do and great-grandsons to watch play ball. Pardon? Yeah. Oh, Lord, help us to be ready to be ministered to. And when we ask you, when you come to us in a still small voice, or however, come to us like you came to this lady through the prophet Elisha. And when somebody comes and we feel it's your Spirit saying to us, what do you want me to do? Let us realize that when we from our hearts are really honest and just express to you what we'd like you to do, that we just need to be ready for you to swing into action because you're going to do it. So thank you, Lord, for these folks. Thank you for your love to us. Oh, Lord, thank you for your word, how it speaks today, written thousands of years ago. And here we are on March 26th or February 26th and enjoying the gold and the gems that come out of the Word of God. Bless us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. What do you got, Chris?